much like the tone of your voice.
And welcome back to another episode of F.O.R.D.E, this week tackling everyone's favourite game, FE7, otherwise known as Blazing Blade, the subtitle that nobody uses because it didn't get localized, therefore the subtitle may as well not fucking exist. Real shame, because, is FE7, I feel like FE7 and FE6 are like the only games in the series where everyone just calls them by the number rather than the subtitle. And even then I still call FE6 Binding Blade sometimes, but I never call FE7 Blazing Blade. Anyway, I digress. You would know that we were tackling an FE7 map if you managed to solve my incredibly challenging anagram from last week's episodes of The Price. I've already forgotten. What the fuck was the what was the anagram for last week? I legit don't even remember. Ardent photophob, as if you rearrange the letters, it will form none other than the port of Badon. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't care about FE7 enough to go through like the proper pronunciations of the world of Alib. Frankly, I think it's a bit beneath me. And I live in the fucking sewers. Anyway, let's get into the fucking map of FE7, Port of Badon, baby. Port of Badon's a weird map. I'll get into it more as we go through the categories, but upon replaying this map, I had like a really like positive view of this map before I replayed it. I feel like I'm pretty harsh on it most of the time compared to a lot of other people, whereas I'm like pretty generous to a lot of other games like Sacred Stones and FE6. But with FE7, I'm really, like, fucking bringing the hammer down. I'm like, you are not allowed to make mistakes or have bad maps or stupid characters. Brah! You must be perfect. With FE7, I feel like FE7 actually has a pretty good mid-game of just stuff like Pirate Ship and Port of Badon and Dread Isle and fucking Dragon's Gate is an excellent map. Like, you have, like, a really nice, like, set of 5 maps in a row where it's like, these are all just fucking banger after banger after banger. But upon my most recent playthrough, I found just like, maybe Port of Badon hasn't aged too well. But anyway, let's get into the categories. First up, flavor. I'm going to be completely blunt on this one. I don't think the flavor for this chapter works in the slightest. I actually think this is the category where it does the absolute poorest. It sets out with an incredibly simple premise of Fargus effectively testing the protagonists by challenging them to a big old brawl to test their mettle. Which is kinda silly in the grand scheme of things to say, hey, let's fight to the fucking death to see if you're strong enough for like a nice boat ride, to see if you're good enough to be a Steamboat Willie. But whatever. It can basically be used as an excuse to have a filler chapter where the main highlights will be large amounts of combat and your XP bar going bring. Really, really satisfying. Cool. Really, really simple premise. I like it. So you'd think a map with a setup like that would be actively encouraging the player to bring both as many combat units as possible and to have a map that actively supports multiple encounters across the map. Something like that. Like a nice wide open map. Like almost a miniature version of an FE4 map where you just have a bunch of empty tiles. Terrain doesn't belong on this map outside of villages. So it's a real shame that this map is primarily focused around playing hyper defensively and slowly, more importantly slowly. And only really needing like 1 to 2 combat units due to the small nature of the map. Seriously, it's like the total opposite of what you'd expect after being told to expect the worst from, like, the beefiest pirate boy you've ever seen. Seriously, Fargus is fucking huge. Have you seen his Elliewood mode stats? I picked the Elliewood mode version of this chapter purely just because Elliewood mode, Fargus, for some reason has, like, capped stats in every area and has, like, 83 health. He's fucking despicable. I don't know why. Fear him. Yeah, it really feels like the map should be this vast, sprawling area with, like, enemies kind of just spotted all over, rather than being in, like, a large fortified group, which is something an organized army would do. It feels very out of place for these guys who are basically just sailors with a criminal record to be using military tactics. Like, it feels very out of place, like that big formation in the center of the map with, like, the 4 pirates and the druid, and or the shaman and the mage. It just doesn't match the overall aesthetic of the chapter. Moreover, the chapter really wants me to feel like we're just sort of play fighting, if you understand what I mean. Almost like the equivalent of, like a dust cloud fight in a cartoon, where we know both sides are gonna be coming out alive. Like, it's just a fun old tussle. I don't know about you guys, but I've always felt like whenever I enter combat with these pirates, and I see their sprites slowly fade into the ether, I feel like I'm killing these guys. Especially the enemies towards the center of the map in that big cluster. Okay, let me rephrase that. I would actually say the flavor of, oh, we're not actually, like, killing each other, we're just having a big old brawl. It works for the guys towards the top of the map, the area in the top of the map where you send, like, one sword unit, like a Raven or a Matthew or a Lynn, to go and fight them, because they're not really a threat. That works. That just feels like, oh, we're just playing around. That's where I actually feel as though I'm just romping around with some nice, like, drunken sailors. I felt a little weird to say, but whatever. But for the main group of enemies, the fact that they're moving in, like, almost a fucking phalanx formation really makes the fight feel way more serious than it should. And there's, like, really easy fixes to enhance the flavor as well. All you gotta do is just separate the enemies. Straight up, you don't need to have them in a giant group. Just have the same amount of enemies. I actually do like the amount of enemies on the map. I think that's a nice amount, a healthy amount. I like the strength of the enemies. I just don't like that they're just in a big old formation. Just scatter them around the map. And while, okay, I was thinking about this as well. Obviously they didn't have access to this at the time, but I'd actually love if this chapter kind of forced casual mode. Meaning that your units wouldn't be permanently killed. Specifically for this chapter, it will be deactivated afterwards. Because it feels really, really out of place to get your characters slaughtered in what's supposed to just be, like, a test of your strength. It just absolutely destroys my immersion to watch Lynn die for the 60th time because she couldn't dodge 2 30s in a row. Three Houses does this with the Chapter 1 mock battle, and it works really, really well there. It boosts the flavor of that chapter quite nicely. I guess it would make, like, Damien and his little squad of goobers kind of awkward to deal, because, like, those guys are absolutely shooting to kill. Like, they want to kill Eliwood and his motley crew. I don't know. I'm sure programming warlocks out there would be able to, like, exempt them from that specific permadeath clause. Either way, I'm kind of rambling. It's definitely a fail on flavor for this one. I want the chapter to feel as though, like, I'm exhausted from having to wrestle a bunch of, like, keel haulers and scallywags. It should feel like a silly chapter. It should feel like almost like a nice little break from, like, ooh, we gotta get to the Dreadhall so I can save Elbert. But first we have to have this wacky pirate filler adventure. Like, I'm fine with a wacky pirate filler adventure. Sounds fun. It should really feel like a silly chapter, but I don't think it succeeds at that. Plain and simple. Moving on to Objective. Objective is kind of a mixed bag here. The actual objective itself is to talk to Fargus in order to end the chapter entirely. Effectively just making the man a seize point. And I know we've been saying this for a couple of chapters at this point. It's kind of sad and a little bit cynical in a way. But yes, a lot of objectives in Fire Emblem can effectively just be boiled down to either kill this specific guy right here, or seize with extra steps. And Port of Badon very much falls into that second category. I will say though, I appreciate that the chapter almost functions as a puzzle chapter in a weird way, as you're immediately presented with the previously mentioned pirates working together in a pretty fortified formation. Probably like the most legitimately difficult group of enemies for you to deal with thus far. Like, FE7 early game isn't that difficult for the most part, but like, it's difficult for like weird reasons. It's not difficult because of like a big chunk of enemies, like holding down a position, so to say. Whereas this chapter really enforces a type of difficulty that really hasn't appeared thus far, which is unique in a way. Now, if you're like me and you're not the smoothest pill in the pack, so to say, you're probably just going to find a way to brute force this chapter by utilizing tanks and choke points. Likely just abusing the fact that Marcus completely invalidates the majority of the difficulty in early game. However, if you look a little bit deeper into it, you can definitely find ways in which you can both collect all of the items from the villages and manage to avoid combat with the more dangerous enemies entirely through utilizing Florina. I've never personally done it myself, but there's absolutely a way to use Florina to rescue your respective lord of Eliwood or Hector, and just have them fly directly to Fargus while also dodging any potential combat. It's arguably a less efficient way to beat the chapter since you're missing out on so much, like, good experience since the enemies are very high level in this chapter. Well, it's like half and half between low level Johnnies and high level Andys. But I do think it's cool when there's multiple ways to complete a map, so I'll give a big old, like, bronze, maybe like a bronze earring into a silver star for that. Well done. As for side objectives, while the map does give you plenty of villages to visit, they're never actually in any danger, which always kind of bothered me. There's no thieves or brigands in the area, and that just kind of feels like a misstep. Again, the lack of needing to play quickly in order to secure the villages further supports the idea of more defensive play, which might be appealing for some players, since defensive play, for the most part, is far easier than aggressive play. But I don't know, man, I just think it's super dull here. The chapter does not feel like it should be defensive, and ultimately it is the best way to play it. Man, this category is actually pretty tough to define. I'm leaning towards a no, but it also has its fair share of strengths in the category as well. I should really just implement a maybe category at some point, but it won't be today because I have far too many things to do, like doing nothing and pretending I am actually doing work. For now, I think I'm going to be generous and give it a success for objective, but I absolutely could see this being a failure as well. Again, this one could absolutely go either way. Very much a, like, if this was a test grade, this would be like a 50 to 60%. It would be like a C or a C+ at best. Now, for our replayability, replayability is somewhat there, but I'm not sure it's that great, to put it bluntly. There's a reasonable amount of flexibility and versatility in the units you can bring coming into the chapter. You're only allowed to bring in 6 units, regardless of which difficulty you're playing on, so the game is almost actively encouraging you to make it so your soldiers are actually bringing something valuable to the chapter. Like, you can't bring deadweight into the chapter. It's like, oh, I'll bring like a fucking Dorcas just to throw a hand X for 10 XP. Like, you won't be doing that in this chapter. You need to make sure every unit counts. But on the other side of that coin, while these picks do matter, they're also already kind of decided for you in a way. Again, maybe I'm being a little bit cynical, but you're always going to bring your Lord, so that's 1 unit. You'll almost always need a healer, so a Sarah or a Priscilla, probably Priscilla, just because Priscilla's strictly better than Sarah. That's 2. You'll need a tank to withstand the hordes of enemies just looking for a chance to swarm you, so that's 3, like your Oswins or your Marcuses. You'll need some kind of sword unit to deal with the pirates up top, be it Matthew, Raven, Eliwood, or Lynn, and that's 4. So, like, the majority of your units are basically just already decided at the start of the chapter, which Now, obviously, you can bring whoever the hell you want into this chapter. I'm not going to just stand here and do the 1984 speech of just, you must bring these units into this chapter. Obviously, you can bring whoever the fuck you want. And you might just decide to skip it with Florina or just straight up not play the chapter entirely, because, you know, you don't have to play Garden chapters. You don't get that much from this chapter. If you for some reason hate Canas, just go, fuck this purple-head dork, I'm skipping to the next chapter. But the majority of players will likely just use the go-to characters I just mentioned in order to beat the chapter. And after that, it's a very simple sequence of just setting up your formation correctly and making sure that your tank is able to withstand multiple attacks from the pirates, mages, and Damien. And that's pretty much it. I know I go blah 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 blah, choke points bad for a lot of these maps, and it's unfortunate, but it's absolutely the best way to play this chapter. And probably, like, the only way for hard difficulties, as for FE7 standards, these pirates are, like, legitimately pretty strong. They have, like, high-quality weapons, they have silver axes and killer axes and killer bows, and, like, they're fully capable of killing Marcus even. In the footage you're seeing, this tactic that I used arguably should not have worked, because I actually got very, very lucky with hit percentages. Yeah, I'm going to go for a failure on replayability. I was generous with objectives, so I'll put my foot down for replayability. I'm standing my ground. It just doesn't really have enough variety to make the chapter that engaging on subsequent playthroughs. As I mentioned at the beginning, I remember the 2 chapters after this one, namely Pirate Ship and Dread Isle, as having some genuinely great replayability. Like, I love those 2 chapters. Pirate Ship's probably, like, one of my favorite maps in the entire game. While here, Port of Badon just kind of pales in comparison overall. For difficulty, the chapter is difficult. I'll give credit where credit is due. The chapter does have some form of difficulty, which is nice. FE7 as a whole isn't a particularly challenging game, so actually having some difficulty is worthy of note. I'll give credit. I just wish this difficulty was something that I'd actually classify as fun. Now, the term fun difficulty can seem kind of nebulous and non-specific, but for me at least, my idea of having fun and engaging difficulty is having a chapter that actually requires me to think, which the chapter does a little bit. A little bit. I feel as though the majority of Port of Badon's challenge just comes from... how do I put it? It comes from shock value. For example, on your first playthrough, and perhaps subsequent ones if you forget about certain things, as, you know, the human brain tends to forget about things, you're not going to know about the line that dictates whether the stronger group of enemies will just run directly at you or not, nor are you going to know that Damien and his merry crew are ambush spawns joining from turn 2. You should not make it so the challenge from your chapter comes from information that the player has absolutely no way of obtaining from the game itself. The only way to actually know about these factors is to have the knowledge beforehand, or to have gotten it from outside sources, like your War of Dragons or your Serenus Forests or your wikis, which is just flat out poor game design. Yeah, I haven't been here very long, but I don't like the way this chapter does difficulty. It has difficulty. I think I've been waiting for a chapter like this to appear, so to say, and that, yes, I am having some trouble getting through the chapter, but the map is difficult because it utilizes nonsense like ambush spawns and invisible aggro lines. I'm fine with aggro lines if you at least give me like a hint that they'll appear or something, or show me. But if they're fucking invisible, then it's really just trial and error. And trial and error, for me, it just doesn't work in difficulty. It's just kind of obnoxious. I can't in good conscience give this category a pass. And moving on to our final category, enjoyability. This one is especially peculiar, because if you look at the analysis of all of the previous categories, you'd probably come to the reasonable conclusion that, oh, he's probably going to give enjoyability a fail, because he doesn't like the chapter very much. But the chapter isn't especially fun to play, as he uses a bunch of no-nos in Fire Emblem, like your ambush spawns and your whatnots, as well as not offering a whole lot on the objective front. And that's where you're wrong, viewer, because some weird part of me still enjoys this chapter for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure why. In fact, you know what? I think I do know why. I think it's because it's a puzzle chapter. Puzzle chapters for me are kind of weirdly enjoyable, because they're surprisingly sparse in Fire Emblem. Like, off the top of my head, the only other ones I can think of are Chapter 10 in Path of Radiance, the Jailbreak chapter, where you can stealth it, which is a really cool idea, and Chapter 5 in Fates, the one where Corrin is a forced dragon form, and like you need to figure out how to deal with the Wormslayer mercenaries and the mages. I actually do quite like that chapter. It's like the only chapter in the first 5 chapters of Fates that I legitimately kind of like. So I always weirdly enjoy them whenever they spring up. Now, the solution stays the same most of the time, but I think it's surprisingly enjoyable to just find the solution to a puzzle in a strategy game. I think it's literally just as simple as that. I don't really need to elaborate any further. I'm going to write this down as me being a weirdo, like usual, and also partially because I don't think this chapter is a 1 out of 5. I would feel kind of gross if I did that, so to say. Like, I don't think the chapter is on the same level as Unbroken Heart. Like, Unbroken Heart fucking sucks. This chapter is, like, kind of weak and awkward in a lot of areas. So, I'm gonna give it a pass for enjoyability despite all of its flaws, because I'm a fucking weirdo. What can I say? I like seeing the XP bar fill up when I kill a bunch of high-level units. I'm a freak! And that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. Yeah, as I stated at the beginning, I remember this chapter being a lot better than it turned out to be on my repeat playthrough. 2 out of 5 categories isn't... like, it's not terrible, but it's definitely what I'd classify as a bad chapter, so to say. Which is weird, since despite the fact that, like I said, I don't enjoy FE7 that much, I do remember Port of Badon being one of the more enjoyable maps in the game. Like, I've always had a massive soft spot for the Dread Isle arc, as that's where most of the good maps are in Blazing Blade. Hey, I called it Blazing Blade. Like, you gotta fucking stay tuned for the Dragon's Gate episode where it somehow fails at all 5 categories somehow, because my memory is just like Swiss cheese and can't actually remember anything. It probably won't. Dragon's Gate's fucking sick. We all know this to be true. As for our anagram, get ready for a fucking doozy, as the title of our next chapter is absolutely the longest thus far, and maybe one of the longest in the series. So, ladies, gentlemen, and all variations thereon, listen close, because our anagram is none other than another stage-like Q gift. If you missed that, for those in the back, another stage-like Q gift. Yeah, no, this is a fucking real tough one. If you don't figure this one out, I will not blame you in the slightest. Anyway, that's gonna be it for me for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I will catch you next week. Have a great one, everyone. I will see you next time.